Hello and welcome to all of you. My name is Baroness Shafik and I'm the director of the London School of Economics and Political Science, and we're delighted to welcome you to this event around Europe's recovery. Now, you can have many debates about Europe's response to the COVID pandemic, but I think there is a consensus that the combined fiscal and monetary stimulus that all European governments and EU institutions provided was a success, and in that it kept job retention high and business insolvency relatively low over the 18 months of the crisis caused by the pandemic. We've now reached a different stage, however, and new questions are emerging. For example, for firms, is it now that most European countries have come out of the moratoria around corporate insolvency, do we expect rates of bankruptcy to skyrocket? Has the stimulus led to a population of zombie firms who've been kept alive by government subsidies and low interest rates during the pandemic, but will they become no longer viable in the post-pandemic world? And are there significant sectoral shifts that will be triggered with the decline of government subsidies? And is the economy about to experience big upheavals? And second, on the labor market side, the focus on households and individuals has been primarily in regard to job retention and keeping people in work. But still, many workers, particularly in some of the larger economies, have chosen to leave their jobs and stay out of the labor market post-COVID. Is this the start of a wider trend? Will we actually see labor force participation around Europe fall? And is this likely to have an effect on inequality of incomes and also between men and women and their labor force participation rates? Thirdly, on externalities. Many European recovery programs, for example, Germany's and France's, have focused on transformation to the green economy. Will this really happen? Or was this just marketing? And how does the political momentum around green issues get translated into a more resilient and competitive European economy in future? And finally, although there's still considerable uncertainty, what can we learn moving forward? What are the main lessons to date from this crisis, both in terms of handling future health crises and future economic shocks? So to discuss these very important issues at this critical juncture in Europe's economy, we have a very distinguished panel who we're delighted to welcome. I'll introduce them briefly and then ask each of them to make remarks for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up to a few questions from me and to questions from the audience. Our speakers today are Luis Garicano, who's a member of the European Parliament, where he is head of the Ciudadanos delegation and vice president and economic coordinator of the Renew Group. He's also a professor of economics and strategy on leave from IE Business School. We'll then hear from Stefanie Stantcheva, who is professor of economics in the Department of Economics at Harvard University, and her work is centered around the long-lasting effects of tax policy on innovation, education, and wealth. And then finally, we hear from Nikos Vettas, who's the general director of the Foundation for Economic and Industrial Research and professor of economics at Athens University of Economics and Business. Just a few logistics. The hashtag for the event this evening is hashtag LSE post-COVID. And please put your questions in the Q&A function. And my colleague, Professor Dimitri Vayanos, who's the director of the Financial Markets Group, will pass those on to me and I will read them out to the panel. So with that, let me turn to our first speaker, Luis, over to you.
Thank you very much, Director. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. You omitted to say that until very, very recently, just a couple of years ago, I was an LSE professor, which is something I'm very proud of. So I'm delighted to be back.
We are too.
So I am very happy to be back here and to address all of those interesting questions you've put. I hope Professor Pisaridis, my colleague Chris, is doing well, and wish him the best. Many questions you asked, and before I go to the presentation, I want to address one of them, which is really an important one, because some of my presentation will have some pessimistic views, and I do want to address the big positive that you did raise, Minusha, that I think is really important, which is that Europe, basically, the European Union has put together the main elements of the recovery for their economies and the health of the citizens. The vaccines have been bought together by Europe. The insurance in terms of ability to borrow of all the firms, the liquidity has been provided by Europe. The money that was used to finance the short-term work schemes on which all European workers were was fully provided by Europe, 100% of it. It was a 100 billion program. And now the money for the recovery is also coming from a joint borrowing by Europe. So in both in terms of health and in terms of jobs, in terms of lives and in terms of jobs, if you want to put it this way, Europe has been essential to coming out of the pandemic. I think it has been the time that the European Union has acted together in the most coherent and most united fashion. Of all of these things, I only want to talk about one, which is the recovery program, which is the very large stimulus program and restructuring program that Europe has put together, and that is designed to have a common response, a common recovery for all the European countries. And I want to talk about a dilemma that we confront and that will be familiar to many people in the audience, which is between stimulus and reform. The first possibility, Keynesian stimulus, is, well, let's just get the money out, let's get the shovels ready, and let's just get everybody working. That's one way to see this program. The second way to see this program is, let's actually spend the money in a way that eliminates structural bottlenecks and get our economy to grow faster. As you will see, the dilemma between these two aspects is really at the basis of some of the main difficulties it has. The recovery fund is a very large program of 750 billion euros. It's called Next Generation EU. And it is has been approved at the same time as the ordinary budget for the next 7 years. And basically, if you look at the numbers, the 750 billion euros is more or less of the same size as the ordinary budget for 7 years. So it's a very, very large amount of money compared to what Europe usually has. Most of the money is in something called the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is an investment vehicle. Think of the infrastructure program of Biden. It's an investment vehicle to in part fill in the holes in the investment infrastructure. These are very large amounts of money, of which Spain and Italy are the main recipients, as you can see here, with 82 billion for Spain and 84 billion for Italy. These are large amounts. If you think about the GDP of Spain is on the order of 1.1 billion euros. 82 billion euros is very significant. It's almost 8 points of GDP. As I was saying, my introduction is going to be about the dilemma between these two ideas, Keynesian stimulus and a micro plan. When Olivier Blanchard was initially going to appear in the workshop, I was thinking of him when I made the slide. He said, Europe should just go fast and spend fast and not go through all these programs. He was on this side. But many of us thought there are really significant structural problems, not just in the European labor market and pensions, etc., but also the new challenges, climate, digitalization, need investments as well. The idea that reforms are needed is something that I think many people on the panel probably share. I mean, Stefanie has been involved in the French structural reform effort. I think Nikos as well in Greece. Idea, look at the total factor productivity in Spain and in Italy. Look at the real GDP per capita. Basically, Italy hasn't grown since 1995 in terms of real GDP per capita. So it's not a question of demand. There are some significant deep things in the economy. Here I show you firm size distribution. Basically, Spain, if you actually had the same firm size distribution as Germany, Spain wouldn't have lower productivity. The big productivity drop happens from the fact that the share of micro enterprises is so much larger. I did a paper with John Van Rienan of the LSE and Claire Lelarge of the NCR, the French Statistical Institute, where we showed the impact and how large it was, this gap between the firms at 49. No, the French firms don't want to have 50 workers. So they stopped growing at 49 because when you're 50, you need to include all sorts of new regulations. It's an AR paper we published a few years ago, 16. So also another example of structural problem, temporary employment, the amount of people who are on temporary employment is very, very large in Spain, and it has nothing to do with kind of good times, bad times. It's large always. Youth unemployment, very, very high. Also not a demand problem, as you can see there. Dropout rates are high. You can see them here in Spain, Italy, Portugal, and very low investments in R&D. Basically, economies that invest around 1% of GDP, a little bit more, versus economies like the German one that invest 3 times as much. So there are structural problems, and Europe has a process which is called the semester process, where they make recommendations to countries. These recommendations are soft. They just say, oh, you should do this, you should reduce school dropout rates, you should harmonize social services, you should improve the public-private collaborations, etc. But people say, oh, fine, you gave me this recommendation, that's okay. This recommendation now has become law in a way that I will explain you immediately. The Recovery and Resilience Facility, that's the main recovery program of Europe, is a program that it's part of what I showed you before. The Next Generation is the biggest part of the Next Generation. Just to remind you, the Next Generation was a total of 750 billion. The Recovery and Resilience Facility is 672 billion out of that. And if you see how much people are asking, it's a direct injection from Europe, not a loan in a big part. It's a grant, so you don't have to give back this part. And then there's also a part of a loan. All countries have asked for the grants. Some countries have asked for loans, which is this orange part, and some countries haven't. Look at Greece, for example. They are investing 18% of GDP in this short period of time, 3 years, that this program lasts, because they're asking for the loans. Italy, 12%. Spain, for example, is only asking for the grant part, so it's more at 6% of GDP. The money can be spent in green, digitalization, competition, social cohesion, institutional resilience, and youth. As you see, there is a structural reform aspect to how the money is supposed to be spent. And there are some conditions. You need to do your plan needs to do certain things in order to be approved. The country presents a plan. Think of a structuring plan by a company, right? You go to the bank, you present the plan. The countries present a plan where they talk about reform recommendations. You remember that soft law I told you? Now it becomes part of the plan that you have to deliver to Europe. You promise to increase economic growth, to contribute to the green transition with 37% of your spending, to invest in ways that are non-negative for the environment, to contribute to the digital transition, and they give you the money. This is in theory. In practice, Europe basically, when the Commission has examined the plan, and I am the scrutiny group in the Parliament, which is looking at these exams. Look at these exams. If Minouche saw one of us professors doing this, she would probably think we are cheating on the grading, because everybody has an A on the first question, everybody has an A in the second question, and everybody has B's on the 9th question. It's like a professor who's not really making a big of a difference between the students. So all the countries have basically the same exact plans, which means the Commission hasn't really been looking to extract big commitments, I think, largely from the member states. Why? This is the previous president of the Commission with the Minister of Economics of Spain. This is current president of the Commission with the President of Spain. The mood is very different. The Commission hasn't wanted to look mean. It's a bit in the line that the director was saying at the start of the presentation. Europe kind of had this austerity. Europe felt that it had gone too far, and now Europe wants to kind of contribute to the recovery. And that kind of makes not very credible Europe's commitment to demand action on this recovery plan. So the risk, from my perspective, is that we don't have funds that can be spent very fast. This is how % of funds, structural funds in Europe usually are spent in the last 7 years. So many countries spend very small percentages, as you see here. Some countries way below 50%, some countries between 50 and 60, but many countries have a lot of trouble spending the money. And so the money doesn't get spent on the one hand, but it doesn't do the reforms on the other. Look at what's happening with investment statistics. The only ones I have the third quarter for is Spain. But this money should be arriving. We should be seeing an investment boom with the European money. It was signed by Spain in late June. And in July, actually, the first money arrived in August. We should be seeing it getting to the expenditure investment statistics. And we don't see anything. So the risk is execution is very low. Spain has budgeted 27 billion for this year. Some of the numbers I've heard are around a couple of 100 million have been spent. If that's true, that's very, very low. And that's consistent with this very low expenditure. In terms of reforms, on the other hand, the reforms that are being done, higher education is a disaster. Instead of kind of having better universities, we're going to have worse after the reform. labor reform is not really improving on both labor tenure and security, nor on collective bargaining, internal flexibility, which is important for a country like Spain. And pensions reform is also not a successful reform in terms of ensuring the sustainability of the system. So my fear is that we will have, we have kind of this dilemma that I talked at the start, this tension between the Commission wanting to tell you, well, spend the money because you are in trouble and you need to recover, and at the same time the Commission and the Parliament and the Council and the government saying, well, let's try to use this money to eliminate bottlenecks and do the climate transition. And the good scenario is we do both. We spend the money well and we achieve these investment objectives. The bad scenario is the effort to fulfill those conditions stops us from really being able to spend the money on time, and we get neither one nor the other part of the dilemma. That's my starting framework to give you a sense of what the recovery money is and how those plans work. But obviously, many of the questions the director posed at the start, I would be very, very happy to address on the course of our conversation. I hope I was okay on time.
That was great, Luis. Thank you so much for giving us such a good overview of the scale of fiscal stimulus that's been provided across Europe. Let's turn to Stefanie next.
Great. Thank you, Luis. This was really illuminating. Thank you very much, Minouche, for the great introduction. I wanted to talk about a broad framework to think about what COVID has done to inequality and some guidance from economic research on what could be done going forward. And something that's important to say at the outset, as Luis made a distinction between immediate stimulus policies versus more longer term structural reforms, the policies that I'm going to talk about here are really medium and longer term actions. They're not short run mitigation strategies, which have already taken place to a large extent. And the reason that we need these is that COVID has exacerbated many existing inequalities. Inequalities across income groups, across sectors, across regions, across gender, across children from different backgrounds. And these have not only been deepened, but they also interact with each other. So to just lay the ground on sort of what we know from the data about each of these inequalities, on the income inequalities, it's very obvious in EU countries and in the US that there's been a much stronger negative impact on lower income households from the pandemic. And so in general, inequality has widened pre-government intervention. At the same time, there's been substantial support from governments that have propped up income, initially in the short run, now also in the medium run. So post-intervention, the inequality increase does not seem large and has been largely muted. But when we think about the long-term impacts, the regressive direct impact of the crisis on sort of pre-intervention incomes is likely to persist. And there are many channels that economists have pointed out over time why this is the case. When people lose jobs, or when people are long-term unemployed, or when businesses get distracted, there can be scarring, there can be hysteresis in the economy. In addition, the acceleration of digitization and automation typically favors higher skill, higher paid jobs. And so this is something that's likely to have lasting consequences, even if the short-term impacts have been muted by policy. One of the vectors for inequalities has actually been this change in the way we work. So remote work has been one of the big evolutions, and remote work has been shown extensively over the pandemic, but also before, to be actually something that benefits especially higher paid jobs. In general, the potential for remote work is much lower towards the bottom of the income distribution. And so if this shift is actually more long lasting, it will not only affect people for different incomes, different sectors differently, but also people across different regions. And so, one of the things that has also happened that has been very disparate across the income distribution is the unemployment risk. So lower income workers were in this sort of dual situation where on the one hand, they were more likely to work in essential positions, which means keep working during the pandemic. At the same time, they're less able to work remotely, which is a negative. And so on balance, actually unemployment shocks have been worse for low income workers. And at the same time, the recovery has been much slower towards the bottom. So this is, again, some statistics that could possibly have a long lasting effect on labor market inequalities. If we think about the digital divide, and Louis also mentioned this, the unequal potential to use technology has been really made very, very salient during the pandemic. There's simple things like disparities in just internet access or just quality of internet access, sufficient and appropriate, hardware, software, equipment for all household members. So the result of this, and I think we're still working on figuring out the huge impact this has been really very unequal access to online work, online learning, online maintaining social lives, online services like deliveries, etc. Turning to another big type of inequality, which is sectoral and regional inequalities, we look at them together because they're so intertwined. And sector inequalities have been very much driven by differences in the ability to stay open during the recurring lockdowns, the ability to substitute online for in-person activity, and then whether they're providing some critical services during the pandemic. So if you look at, for instance, the US, small business revenues in sectors such as leisure or hospitality declined very, very sharply, also in retail and transportation. At the same time, not just revenues, but also even venture capital investments in sectors like health or IT companies have really surged. So very disparate evolutions of the sectors. Across region, this has had big impacts too, because sectors tend to be concentrated in different regions. And regions that are in general more rural or poor have been hardest hit for many reasons, both in terms of COVID mortality and in terms of economic impacts. And it's still an open question what the long run evolution of these regional differences will be, whether we're going to go to a whole reshaping of the urban-rural divide or suburban divide because of the possibilities of remote work. One thing that can't be ignored during this pandemic is the very unequal impacts across gender. So lots of research was done on this in the last 18 months. So women experienced more work from home, conditional on remaining employed. At the same time, they also experienced much larger increases in unemployment and a stronger reduction in work hours if they remained employed. So some people have coined this term, this she-cession, which contrary to previous recessions where typically men's employment was hit hardest, in this case, it's been the reverse, where it seems like women's employment was much harder hit. And if we look at finally the inequalities for children, those are probably the things that will be most long lasting. So, in childhood, every year can have a huge impact on the future. And so people have documented very large disparities in the time that children could spend learning and learning delays across the income distribution, mainly due to unequal technical and resource constraints at home and family resources. So very disparate experiences for children during the pandemic. And this is possibly something that we'll have to deal with for many, many years ahead. So what we did with Dani Roderick in a report for Emmanuel Macron, the French president, was to propose some guidance for these medium and long-term policies, given all these exacerbations of inequality. And the way we think about policies is using this simple policy matrix, which is basically a way to systematize and classify policy views. So this matrix has rows and columns. So in the rows, it's at which stage of at which income distribution part you tend to intervene. Are you targeting the bottom incomes or the middle class, or rather top incomes? And then the columns show at which stage of the economy you want to intervene. And here we separate between the pre-production stage, which would be things that happen before you enter the labor market, before firms start operating. So these are things like education, training, and also things that affect endowments, like financial endowments, such as the inheritance tax or estate taxes. In the middle, we have this production stage. This is the labor market. This is where production activities happen. And here, policies to act on them range from regulations, such as the minimum wage, and in work benefits, but also R&D policies, on-the-job training, trade policies, structural programs, etc. And then finally, we have our post-production stage. These are policies that intervene once incomes have been realized. So these are our typical, for instance, progressive taxation and social insurance policies. And what we try to point out is that COVID has simply exacerbated some long-lasting structural changes, which are due to, on the one hand, globalization, and the other hand, technological change. These are secular changes, and COVID has sort of, increased the speed at which these are starting to have effects. And these changes have had one big impact, which is that they've really hollowed out somehow the middle class, good jobs and good living standards. Before, in the traditional welfare states, policies tended to intervene mainly in the first pillar, pre-production, and in the third pillar, post-production, because the assumption was that anyone with sufficient education could find a good job. And so it was sufficient, in a sense, to, when you think about inequality, to act on the third and first pillars. And the second pillar was mainly there to think about competitiveness, economic efficiency. It was an agenda that was very distinct from thinking about inequality in social policies. But today, this seems to be, really, really out of date, because this hollowing out of good jobs, of good opportunities, and this cleavage that appears between sort of metropolitan, well-educated, technically savvy elites and people in other regions that are falling behind because of globalization and technological change, that can't be only addressed with the first and third pillar. And so what we advocate for is to think sort of holistically about all these ranges of policies, not load everything on, for instance, just taxes, not load everything on just education, but also think about intervening more directly into the production stage, into the labor market. And to end with some concrete examples of policies, and we can talk about them more during the Q&A. In the first pillar, some of the key policies for which the debate is now starting to happen again is things that reduce the persistence of wealth across generations. So these are inheritance, estate, or gift taxes. They're very unpopular taxes, and we can show that it's partially due to misunderstanding of how they work and who actually bears them. But there's a lot of arguments to try and reform current systems so that they can be, in a sense, truly progressive, that they don't necessarily penalize, middle-class parents that save hard to leave something to their children, and that address concerns with inequality. Another important, of course, policy, and Luis also mentioned this, is, of course, education policy, where there's a lot of spending in the EU on education, but still what's sort of lacking is a better targeting of public investment towards disadvantaged areas, schools, and children. And this idea that you can try to some extent to level the playing field by substituting for missing family inputs. And that goes through providing, trying to equalize the very unequal access to digital resources, and also to facilitate a transition into work, specifically in light of the very large youth unemployment in Europe. In the middle pillar, the core sort of types of policies that could be very beneficial are what's called employer-focused active labor market policies. So active labor market policies are things like skill training, helping people find jobs, public sector programs, etc. They have a mixed record, but what has a very good record is what's called sectoral training programs in the US. And the difference with traditional labor market policies is that they're very much centered on the employer. They involve the employer. So one example is, for instance, Project Quest in San Antonio. They are basically geared towards local employers' needs. They cooperate closely with them, even on the design of the curriculum of the training. They have specific training also on soft skills, which have been shown to be so important. They track people, even post-training during employment, and they're typically run by communities or private agencies locally. So we think that could be a very good template for what to do in many European countries. And so this goes hand in hand with business incentives that are focused on creating good jobs. So instead of just focusing, as is often the case today, on just subsidies for physical investment and new technology, which are great and are needed, to also directly try to incentivize businesses for good job creation, make that sort of one of the objectives of the policies. And so there's some very good suggestions by Tim Bartik on how to focus on areas that are distressed, on how to center around jobs around sectors that have job creating potential, and not only use tax incentives, but rather a whole bundle like customized business services, zoning and infrastructure policies, and local amenities, and again, all the skill training we just mentioned. And the final pillar, in just the last 30 seconds here, is on the taxation part, really, this last pillar on what to do. And here, there's some really promising developments that can help countries raise more revenues in a better way, as will be needed. So the goal is not to increase taxes, the goal is to tax better. And there's many suggestions that have been made in many recent developments. So one important development, for instance, has been the major improvement in international cooperation through the automatic exchange of information, which makes it much easier now to track taxpayers' capital income across countries and to potentially improve the taxation of capital and improve compliance. And on the question of how to make the tax administration more efficient and reduce fiscal leakages, again, there have been many great suggestions, such as expanding third-party reporting, especially for difficult to catch income like private businesses or partnerships, leverage all these new methods in data analytics, machine learning, and AI to actually reduce non-compliance, and also just very simply give more resources to tax administrations to update their often outdated technology infrastructure and analytical capacities. And one thing that has been incredibly promising and that is a huge potential source of revenue that's currently wasted is the issue of multinational taxation. And the last few months have seen enormous progress through the OECD's base erosion and profit shifting framework and the minimum taxes that have been implemented. And these policies are, very promising because they address both a revenue need, but also an important fairness concern that people have with this idea that companies benefit in good times or they're bailed out by the government when things get tough, but they don't necessarily, in many people's minds, contribute enough to the common revenue pool. And so I'll end here. I hope this was a useful overview of how we think about these various inequalities and policies to target them, and looking forward to the questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Stefanie. That was incredibly helpful and gave a lot of nuance to the inequality consequences of what is happening now. Let's turn to Nikos.
Thank you. I'll try to present some scattered thoughts. The topic is too big to do justice in a few minutes, but it's also very important, extremely important for where Europe may be going. We all know that Europe has had its weaknesses in the last few decades. It is probable that the US economy and parts of Asia are coming out of the crisis more dynamic than Europe does. So the question of what all this money that's going to be spent, the way that Luis in particular presented it, the questions may be three. Are we just spending more money and then our children and grandchildren have to pay that? The second question is Europe going to come more united out of this? Remember, we almost had the Eurozone crisis just a few years back. And the third question is about the global division of labor and what Europe will be, how productive and how competitive it's going to be. Let me share just a few slides with you, if I may. So, and as I said, my thoughts will not be completely organized, but I hope at least a couple of them may be useful. So the first thing to say is the money is significant. It's very significant. Luis showed the analogy for at least some countries, the money is huge. But in my view, the most important part is the signaling role that this money already has had. So in some sense, half of the battle has been won before we even implement. The fact that it has been demonstrated that Europe can move in this direction is half of the battle. It's not all the battle, but it's half of the battle. It's also very promising that we have put reforms at the same level as investment. The reforms, of course, mean different things to different people. There is also a very interesting debate we can have as to what extent reforms and investment are substitutes or one is needed for the other. However, when it comes to the monitoring stage, which is starting just now, we're going to see how this works on the ground. Now, on that, already there were a few very interesting insights presented, especially by Luis. Everyone has its, their idea shaped by background. I've had the chance to be in Greece during 3 rescue and finance programs from 2010 through 2018. And it has been almost 8 years, maybe slightly more, of continuous monitoring by European and other institutions. And the idea was, we're going to give you money so that the country moves ahead, but you have to reform. I put the word uncertainty there on purpose. One of the things that went wrong, several things went wrong during these programs. Eventually, some things went well. But some of the things that went wrong was that there was massive uncertainty about the direction of the program on the ground. Bureaucrats on all sides were arguing until very late in midnight every week. That's not something that I think we will see, but it's certainly something we should avoid, to have this multiplied by every EU member state. It's still interesting to think about whether the plans add up. The linkages, investment in one country, what they're going to do in other countries. There are certainly certain sectors in Greece and other smaller economies, such as energy, transport, where investment decisions there are primarily going to generate production and jobs elsewhere in Europe. So it's not completely clear to me that the adding up has been done, either in this positive light, that there are externalities, positive externalities from one plan to the other, but there are also some worrisome questions, such as pretty much every country argues is going to grow, every economy argues is going to grow through more exports. But European economies, to a large extent, tend to export to one another. We cannot all increase our net exporting positions at the same time. The two, perhaps the most crucial part, and to this I'm coming closer to Stefanie's presentation, but from a different viewpoint, is the type of inequalities that the programs can help eliminate or the programs can help strengthen. And I don't have much to say about gender inequality or young or across generations. But there is also a story to be said about those that, because they have stronger political capital, they're going to be closer to the source of money, whereas those that don't have this political capital will be left out of the money, and therefore they may come out of this weaker. So let me come now to a few details, just very few, and then come back to the big EU picture. But I want to show a couple of slides about Greece. We know from Tolstoy and Anna Karenina that, how does this go? All happy families are more or less the same. Every unhappy family is a little bit different, or something like that. So let me tell you a few things about the unhappy family called the Greek economy. Greece was one of the first countries that put in front of Brussels their plan. It seems it's a good plan, but as Louis said, pretty much every plan seems it's a good plan on paper. All the details, there are little boxes here to be opened. I'm gonna, rather than opening up the boxes, I'm gonna say a few things that come out of work that we did under the coordination of Chris Pisaridis, that for whom I'm filling in this evening, and perhaps Chris can add details in subsequent events. So we were asked by the Greek government, in fact, by the office of the Prime Minister, to write down some growth ideas for Greece. Dimitri Vagianos, that you know from LSE, and also Kostas Megir at Yale, were also leading parts of the team, and some other colleagues. Now, here is the picture for Greece. Blue is up. And then you see that these years of high real GDP growth, and this includes the years where Greece became part of the Eurozone, were subsequent followed by some really terrible years of cumulative recession of about 25%. Those were the programs I was telling you. Greece naturally was not the only country that got into programs. There was a large part of the EU periphery. And then as the economy started getting into the positive again, then we were hit by the new COVID crisis. So the question is how you read this and how you use the money, which is only a small part of the investment gap that has been generated. So there was a report that we published. The report had two key numbers on which it was based. One was productivity trends. As you can imagine, we are economists. So there are all sorts of nice graphs that can show how the economy may have been derailed in the first years of joining the Eurozone, and then the adjustment that was made during the programs and what is needed so that the economy gets back to a strong growth path. The other, for which I don't have a slide right now, I could, but I don't have the time, is labor force participation. And the picture there is very weak. I believe only Italy comes close. Labor force participation pre-COVID was weak in Greece, especially by women. And joining this with Stefanie's idea, it's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen to labor force participation, especially in different parts of the population coming out. All this leads to three things that I'm going to show, and what the current program that has been put in front of Brussels is trying to tackle. One is the economy is quite introvert. If you compare, for instance, Greece with two other 9 EU members in terms of how much it is exporting as part of its GDP, you see that the average number here on the right for these 9 other similar size economies is about 65% of GDP, whereas Greece exports less than 40% of GDP. This has to do with geography, no doubt, but it also has to do with the structure of the economy, especially the smaller size of firms and high regulatory burden. This has led in the past to a derail of trade balance and current account, to a very large investment gap the last years. And then the question is, if you do have money, what you do with this money? Our idea is that you should do two things. You should try to focus on boosting employment through increase, for instance, in the labor force participation, but also otherwise. We have been particularly focused on what you can do to support female labor force participation and younger people. And then what you can do on productivity. If you multiply now these things, you come up with a story where from really low numbers, including now also the funds, but also what private funds, these funds are going to leverage, this can lead over the next 10 years to a pretty good picture for Greece. Now, you may say, who cares about Greece? First of all, I care, and some other people care. But this is a story that has to do with whether the EU can come out of this also more united. Because if it comes with countries and economies moving in all different directions, then in 4 or 5 years from now, no doubt we're going to see some new crisis. I'm concluding with two sets of ideas. For many countries, certainly for Greece, but my view is also for Europe, the next 2 or 3 years are going to be relatively easy. Money will continue to be relatively cheap. We have an investment gap to fill. Employment can go up. And there is also this EU money. The question is what happens after the effect of these positive factors reduces. So 3 or 4 years from now. So this is going to be completely valuable time that has to be used effectively. This refers to everybody, people on the ground, businesses, obviously the politicians. Otherwise, we will have to take a very long look on how Europe is going to look 3 or 4 years from now. Final remarks. The recovery fund and everything around it has been a positive step for Europe. But Europe has been coming into the crisis weaker than other parts of the world. And it is unclear that right now it definitely and in a very persuasive manner can claim that its competitiveness vis-a-vis this other part of the world is going to go up. It's a big question mark. How close the core and the periphery are going to work in the next 2 or 3 years is also a big question mark. The recent moves, no doubt, is a positive step. Going out to the markets and borrowing, grants, coordination, but we are not there yet. Unless we move, for instance, to a common policy vis-a-vis our banks, and so on and so forth, we are only going to be looking at trouble in the future. Then there is the issue of old versus new economy. This refers, even if you go sector by sector, energy, new versus old is huge. Cars, a huge part of Europe is gonna, manufacturing in Europe, especially Germany and around, refers to decisions that are gonna be made about what type of cars we're gonna have and so on and so forth. And eventually, this leads to what sort of fiscal rules we're going to have. The discussion is serious and ongoing. There are those that believe that the 60% and the 3% rules in the Eurozone, they're just too far away from reality. But how do you write the new rules? How you implement them? Are you gonna make exceptions about green and digital and human capital? Or are you gonna put everything in one basket? This is a discussion that, in my view, we should be having already. And it seems to me that we are only, that we haven't really started. Can Greece grow in this context? My last sentence. The complementarity between investment and reforms is the key. To the extent that money in economies like Greece, and I could actually list another at least 10 or 15 economies in Europe like this, to the extent that the new funds are going to strengthen the existing structure of the economies and just do that, I believe that's the wrong direction. There is a window of opportunity. There is a chance that this money is in fact going to create new pockets in the economy. It's not going to be uniform growth, but it's going to help transform. But this is as much an economics question as it is a politics question. I'm closing with this and happy, of course, to participate in Q&A and further dialogue.
Thank you, Nikos. Thank you for giving us a sense of what the recovery program looks like from the perspective of Greece and what the wider lessons could be. So I'm going to ask the panel 2 questions, and maybe I'll just come to each of you to respond. The first question is the dilemma between, I think, Louise, you started by, stimulus versus reform. And there is a real risk, and you all hinted at this, that the stimulus, this massive amount of resources that's been given to stimulus, simply preserves old jobs and preserves old firms and kind of keeps the current show afloat for a few more years. Nikos referred to a couple of more years, without actually transforming the European economy in a structural, profound way. And the fact that the levels of spending of the current programs already seems a bit slow is worrying in that sense. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about how can we make sure that this fantastic opportunity to transform Europe's economy actually has structural consequences? And how can we, I'll just give a small example. In the UK context, I remember thinking they had a furlough scheme very similar to Europe's, which paid people to stay in the same jobs. But if you made that furlough money portable, so people could move to new jobs, you would have accelerated the shift in the labor market to the jobs of the future rather than preserving the jobs of the past. And I just wonder whether there are other things like that that we could think about that would encourage this to be a transformative moment rather than a keeping things afloat for a bit longer moment. That's my first question. My second question is, everyone in Europe is talking about, is this the Hamiltonian moment for the European Union? Will this be the moment when risks are pooled and shared, whether it's fiscal, banking union, etc.? And I always remember Angela Merkel saying, why do we, rather than bail each other out, why don't we invest together? And the appetite to investing together as opposed to paying off each other's debts is quite high. And this recovery program is a lot about investing together and investing in each other. And so my question is, again, what are the politics and economics around making this a Hamiltonian moment around investment and recovery rather than bailouts? So maybe I'll start, Luis, maybe I'll start with you and then Stefanie and then Nikos.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. It was very interesting to hear my colleagues. I would like to hear more Nikos later, if that's okay, if there's a moment, on how the plan was come together. And I think Stefanie also kind of participated in the plan in France. To what extent was politics and to what extent was economics or expertise? I would be curious about that. So the two questions are indeed very related, because to the extent that the money is transformative, I think it's more likely that we have a Hamiltonian moment. Yes. What I mean by this is that if this opportunity is wasted, if people feel we're so kind of graft and corruption and money spent in kind of keeping things the same and nothing really being done with it, it's very hard that Europe will decide that this is the first step of something. So in a way, Europe has kind of waded into this pool and stuck his foot in there to see how cold the water was. That's great. And the responsibility of the countries getting these massive amounts of funds is to spend it well. Because I think for it to be a Hamiltonian moment, what you really need is, I think you need several things. You need to issue debt together. We did that. It has to be permanent, so that issuance, the ability to issue debt as a continent has to continue. You need to have a common backing for this debt, and that's the EU budget, and you need to have revenue in Europe to pay back the debt. So one thing that Hamilton did, right, is that he said, look, we're going to assume all the debt of the South and the North, put it all in the same box, move the capital to the South because the South here was the creditor, so they needed some reward. And we're going to have federal income, over some years. It's not just the Hamiltonian moment is not 1 year, it's a century. But anyway, we're going to have taxes that flow to the center. Federal income taxes much, much later, but many other sources of revenue. Europe doesn't have any sources of taxes. Europe doesn't have their own source of revenue. We did have them at the start with the UK rebate, the formula changed, and it was more about calculating how much each country gets in and gets out. So it became much more of a negotiation about how much money we put. So Europe doesn't have their own source of revenues, very much like the United Nations. It has to go to all the countries and ask for money, which is a very bad way to source yourself with funds, and definitely not a Hamiltonian way. So if we want to issue this revenue, and if we want to continue issuing this debt in the future and being able to invest it together, the three elements, then we're going to have to do this first stage well. To me, what does doing this first stage well mean? It means we need to spend the money, we need to spend it cleanly and without corruption, but it needs something more to be transformative, which I think it's something Stefanie said very much, which is human capital, training, education. The biggest impact of this crisis has been kids from lower income backgrounds, etc., not having classes, in some countries months, in the US sometimes years. I mean, our colleagues in the East Coast tell us of systems. Maybe Stefanie has colleagues who've complained about kids being at home for a whole year or 2 years. I mean, something crazy. Yeah. Obviously in private schools that hasn't happened. So it's public schools that have done that. And there are kids going to public schools who've lost a year, 2 years. There are people in training who need to go back to jobs and need training. I think the thing that most importantly needs to be done with these recovery funds is digitalization is not about buying computers. Sorry for interrupting. It's not about buying computers. It's about training people to use them and to be able to live in this world. And I fear that because the money needs to be spent fast, and because there's this trend to use it as stimulus and this pressure to use it as stimulus, I have this fear that it will be more bricks and mortar and investment in things rather than investment in people. And transformative to me means investing in people.
Yeah, very good point. Stefanie.
Yes, no, these are excellent and tough questions. I think it's really a matter of horizon too. So normally we think of short-run interventions as being very much, bail out, patch the things up, because especially with a huge hit of the pandemic, it was incredibly urgent to prevent, business relations from breaking down, prevent businesses from altogether failing, maintaining employment. And so that's a very, very good and rational thing to do in the short run. I think Luis is pointing at that too, that it's not necessarily great if this emergency attitude spills over into the medium and longer run, when actually much more profound, structural changes are needed. And I think that's why we also think about these three pillars along which changes are needed. And yes, one of the key ones is very much like the center pillar, the production stage, very much requires proper training and these active labor market policies that help actually create good jobs, because that is something which has been, chronic in a sense, not just in Europe, also in the US, the structural decline of really good employment opportunities, not just any job, but jobs that provide, sufficient wages, that provide some career progression, a good work environment, things that if you ask people, they truly care about. It's not just about the pay. Pay matters a lot, but opportunities, career progression, some autonomy, basically what people say is a good job is really declining. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think my video froze.
Yes, your video froze, but we can hear you.
I'm still here. And so, I think this is very much something that's going to be incredibly needed, and to make up for the huge misses in education that are so unequal is also going to be a huge challenge.
Let's turn to Nikos next.
Well, as Stefanie said, you're asking tough questions. On the one hand, I think that Luis is right. And if we don't do the job well with this opportunity, it's going to be really hard 3 or 4 years from now to argue that the relation has to deepen. So this is crucial. But now the question is, what does it mean to do the job right? Because perhaps if we invest on more superficial things, the average voter might be happier, so they might want to support more of this. Whereas if we do harder things, then the fruits may come 5 or 10 years down the road, when it might be too late for politics. So we need to find a balance of that. I also think that it's very important, in some sense, that we have those who are the politicians and communicate with the people, they communicate realistic expectations. The fact that this money is now going to be spent, and the fact that we're coordinating, is very important, but this also comes as a response to a very difficult situation. Europe has been investing very little and has been not competitive enough for several years getting into COVID, and COVID has been a very deep wound. So to expect that we are going to do great in the next few years, if we set the bar there, and then people will look into their pockets 3 or 4 years from now and say, no, we are not doing great. But, well, this is, yes, but if we haven't done that, you would have been much worse. This is a much more difficult political message to put across. The one thing that, so you do have to create reasonable optimism and a good balance between keeping people happy so that their standards of living do not go down, but at the same time create the conditions so that productivity goes up for our children. It's our children that, when we borrow, will have to pay back. One final word which can be poisoned is bureaucracy. And bureaucracies have a way, of course, to replicate themselves. It should not be allowed that these programs generate new bureaucracies. You know, as Luis indicated, it's like as if we doubled the budget of the union overnight. If it runs in a very bureaucratic manner, this might be a problem. So you have to think about this balance. The fact that, you know, there are these concerns doesn't mean that overall the direction is not correct. It is.
So your final point, Nikos, on bureaucracy is actually leads me very nicely to the first question, which comes from Dimitri Korpakis, a former official in the EU. And Dimitri says that one of the characteristics of all the recovery plans is that they're conceived as huge top-down planning initiatives, ignoring almost completely the regional or local level. What can this tell us for their future success, when we know that to be successful, any plan needs to win adherence and engagement by local communities? Who would like to take that one on? Luis, do I sense you wanting to reply?
Yeah, I'm happy to reply. I think it has to do with politics. I mean, I think that's a big government having just a very sweet, you know, present from Europe of the ability to spend over the next 2 or 3 years, short horizon, a very large amount of investment funds, doesn't want to necessarily share all the credit with many other governments. So there's a tendency there indeed. There's also the hurry, the fact that things have to be done fast. But I totally agree that if you don't involve the recipients, you're unlikely to succeed. I think there has been a lot of learning on all these structural reform programs, not just in Greece, but India went through huge structural reforms, many other countries. And there has been a lot of learning about the need to involve the communities and involve the regions and involve the local governments. And I do think that the risk that this official is pointing out is there, that once the big, beautiful plan that everybody liked and it was very well negotiated gets into action, if the community was not involved, then it's likely that it won't be well spent because nobody really asks for the local knowledge. I think that the way around that, I think I liked very much something in the French plan, which is that they had a website, and they gave money to small and medium enterprises. They said, I don't know if Stefanie has seen this plan, which is very nice. It's a few billion euros worth. So you have this website, you have all the people who offer digital services like training and making you a web page, etc. And you get this money to the little businesses, to the shopkeepers, to the small, professionals and plumbers, and they kind of go to this site to bid and to ask for services that they want to buy. So they go to check and they want to buy these services. And I like much more this kind of approach. It says, okay, we'll give you a check and we give you some training. I remember that French site, there's a little diagnosis tool. So you can go there and they tell you whether you need help with a web page or you need help with electronic commerce. You have a web page already, but nobody can buy your services online. Nobody can find them. So they can give you this kind of help. And I like that kind of decentralized approach much more. But indeed, many of the programs seem much more like a big program that is designed to spend a lot of money very quickly.
Stefanie, Nikos, did you want to add anything, or should I move to the?
Look, yeah, I'm not sure. The question sounds like one where you're tempted to say, yeah, you're right. Okay, you have to involve everyone, and it has to be bottom up, etc. But the truth of the matter is that the rules are so strict and the timing is so little that you cannot be as comprehensive as perhaps you want. The other thing is, and that's also a little bit of a dangerous idea that perhaps I'm going to say, not everyone can and not everybody should benefit equally. I think what the plan can do is to create the opportunity for those who are willing to move forward. And just to give you a very small example, we are all academics here. Countries have lots and lots of universities. To insist that all universities will rise uniformly, and you're gonna, everyone is gonna have access to the same amount of money. That's not gonna work. Put the rules there, be creative with the rules, and those who can actually use these rules more effectively can move ahead, and that's fine. I don't want to sound cruel with what I'm saying, but once people see success, then this also motivates others.
I mean, I think in any fiscal allocation mechanism, you have to combine both need and performance. So you allocate to those who need it the most, but also those who can perform. And it's that magic combination that a good fiscal allocation system uses. Let me turn to the next question, which is Osvaldo Feinstein, who's an LSE visiting professor. And he notes that Luis mentioned the superficial examination of the plans, the fact that everyone got an A grade, which would never happen at the London School of Economics, as you well noted, Luis. Could it be possible to involve professional evaluators in the process of reviewing implementation for accountability and learning? So I think he's referring to, okay, we gave everyone an A for their plan, but now should we grade them a bit more rigorously for their implementation?
Yes. I would like to hear on the allocation, Stefanie, who's an expert on that. Maybe she has something later to say. But on the grading, yes, I think that it was inevitably a political process. I mean, the treaties say that the Commission cannot give this kind of grading kind of ability to somebody else because the money is the responsibility of the Commission. The Commission could have asked somebody to propose grades, but they would still have had this ultimate authority. It's a political decision, and it was clearly political, as we can see from the actual grades. Can they involve experts in the evaluation of the milestones? So now the countries, in order to receive money, this is just an important thing that I didn't say in the talk, but basically what is different about this money versus previous money is that normally in the past you get a subsidy and then you do a road. This money now is performance-based money, which means you do something that you've promised to do in your plan, and if you do it well, you get the money. So somebody has to decide whether you reach that milestone, that target. And it would be good to have some external information on that. I think it's going to be very hard. For the reasons I said about Keynesian stimulus, it's going to be very hard for the Commission when it comes down to it to say, well, sorry, your labor reform doesn't work. I'm not going to give you the money. Because then suddenly a country will, there's so much investment, so much staff depending on it. It will be, I think it will be a big shock for the country. So the Commission will always try to find a reason to pass the student if the analogy serves as well, because the student always has some extenuating circumstances. You know what I mean. So I think that some separation between the evaluator and the one who actually gives the money could be a good thing indeed. But I am doubtful that can be done.
Stefanie, did you want to come in on this?
No, I think the answers were already great.
Okay, great. Let me turn to the next question, which comes from Mariana from Credit Suisse, who asks, what will be the role of funds that might come from the EU Green Deal in paying off the RRF recovery program in the longer term? Any who would like to take that one?
I'm happy to answer in terms of, I mean, I mean, I don't know if it's paying off. I mean, the funds are designed, 37% of the money is designed, it's obligatory for every plan in every country to use 37% of the money for the Green New Deal. It's supposed to be used to invest in the climate change challenge. And that's, I think, exactly for the reason you mentioned, that Merkel and the other leaders are much happier to help other countries invest in being greener than to help countries deal with some past problems they might have had. So there is a sense that the climate emergency justifies a lot of this spending. And it's true that that we will issue green bonds for that. Maybe that's what the great person was pointing out. We will issue quite a bit of green bonds. But every single plan in every single country is actually oriented towards fulfilling our Green New Deal obligations and targets, decarbonization, et cetera, et cetera. So it will actually be oriented in that way, or 37% of it.
Okay, I've got a question now, which is really an intra-European balancing question. It's from Michael, who's an LSE student. And he says he wants to ask a question about the unresolved political economy legacy, really, from the Eurozone crisis. He says, since the Eurozone crisis, peripheral Eurozone states instilled crippling austerity measures to offset external imbalances in the current and capital accounts with countries like Germany. But these structural reforms have been terribly one-sided adjustment. Is there room for Germany and other surplus net lending European countries to adjust toward that of the peripheral states? And is convergence and sustained prosperity a possibility even without Germany, Benelux, Australia adjusting? So, and another version of that question is always, do the AAA countries need to do more fiscal in order to help the countries who are in the so-called periphery? Any reactions to that? And Stefanie, I might put you on the spot because you're the fiscal person.
I was going to say, this is more of a political question, so I would defer to the actual policymakers here.
Okay. Nikos, you've probably thought a lot about this in the context of Greece.
I have, but I'm not a policymaker, so that goes back to Luis. But I have thoughts, but
please give us your thoughts, and then we'll turn to Luis.
Okay, first of all, to be honest, already what we see is a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the AAA countries sharing their credit with others. Now the question is which way this is going to go down the road, because we did this at a time of extreme emergency. I want to connect the answer here to something that Luis said, which has to do with, how harsh can we expect that people are going to be when grading the performance? Because indeed, the money is going to be paid after the job is done. So it's really, have you done this or that? But I think that in addition, it doesn't have to, I mean, you can be effective even if you don't stop the flow of this money, by sending some signals. Why I'm saying this is because countries still are going to need a massive amount of other money. They still need to go out and borrow. Greece for sure, Italy, God forbid. You know, the large countries, the small countries. So the signals that are going to come from how the program progresses. So whether you're going to get an A or an A minus or an A today and an A after, you know, 3 weeks of negotiation, these signals are going to be viewed by the global markets. So this money here is a lot, but it's peanuts relative to the overall funding needs. I don't know if Stefanie and Luis agree with that. So the way it's going to be handled, it's going to have a signaling role.
Okay, very good. Stefanie, Luis, did you want to add anything on that pan-European question? And I think we'll wrap up after that.
No, I'm happy with the answer. I do think that indeed it's kind of quote old-fashioned to say Germany is not doing anything, in the sense that they have supported this joint fiscal expansion, which they are doing in part themselves. So I think it's partly a response to that criticism that has led to the $750 billion euro borrowing facility that is actually shared by all of these countries in the European Union.
I agree. I mean, I think very much that this whole recovery plan is a little bit of, I think you started with this, Luis. This is a little bit of the antidote to the age of austerity in Europe.
Yes, I
to
think
try and move to a different policy regime. I mean, there's much more to go, and the question of what happens to the European fiscal targets, the deficit, that all has to be resolved at some point. But this is already a very big step in a new direction.
exactly.
And I think it is a very critical moment. Your comments and your presentations really highlighted the opportunity and the risks and the things that Europe needs to do to make sure that this opportunity is one that results in a lasting transformation. And so thank you very much for your presentations. Thank you to the audience for your questions and your participation. And let's all see what happens in the years ahead and hope for a positive outcome. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks to you, and I hope soon we will be able to do this in person at LSE, which is
absolutely. You're all invited. Come to the LSE soon.
Hopefully, whenever this virus leaves us alone, because it seems like Europe is not looking fantastic now. Anyway.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you again, everyone. Thank you so
Bye.
much.